Hello! Today we're going to continue with a course on HCI storage. In the last class we talked about the basic concept of data, and in this class we'll mainly discuss the relationship between data and information. First, let's introduce the cycle of data processing. So why start with the processing cycle? In fact, in computers, the concept of information and data are related to each other. They are not completely independent. They are related to each other. What is the connection? First of all, let me briefly introduce the data processing cycle. It's actually divided into three simple steps: input, processing, and output. The processing happens in between. Input is basically when we take data in a fundamental form. It can be in any format, like we mentioned earlier, structured data, unstructured data, or semi-structured data. Any form is acceptable. Where does the input go? The input can go to either our brain or a computer. Here we can actually divide it into two parts, mainly into two types: our brain and the computer's brain. To process our data, and the first step is to tell our brain or the computer what the data is. That's the input step. After the input, what kind of secondary processing are we doing? What kind of processing? It's actually simple. To sum up, that's right, let's summarize. For example, let's take the student information table we mentioned earlier. First of all, our student information table contains the information of each student, right? Basic information. However, during the collection process, it's definitely not possible to collect it in a neat table format, right? When we collect information from many students, we might just casually ask them, or we might say, please send me your basic identity information, like text it to my phone. So, in this case, everyone needs to pay attention to the fact that after we collect some data, it's actually scattered and disorganized. Even if we ultimately want to store it as structured data, it might start out as some chaotic and unorganized data. Does this count as data? Yes. Yes, they count as data. So we need to do some secondary processing. If we don't process it, it gets too messy. The way we process it is by placing this data into a two-dimensional table, right? We put it in a two-dimensional table, where the rows and columns are clearly defined. Each row contains a student's information, and each column represents a specific attribute. So what is this? This is the processing step. The same is true for computers. We can also use computers to help us process. In fact, this process is actually the computer helping us process. So we open our spreadsheet on the computer. After opening the spreadsheet, we input the data, then summarize it, and ultimately output it as a complete set of data information. This is the overall data processing cycle. Once the processing is complete, the output we get can be referred to as information. What does that mean? In computers, the concept of information is data that has been processed and has logical relationships is called information. This concept is quite simple. The data we have processed, or the data that has undergone secondary processing, is what we refer to as information. Why do I say this? First, we can define everything we see in our daily lives as data. However, it doesn't necessarily have value. It might just be data sitting there without any significance to us. Information is the useful and valuable data that has been logically processed by either the human brain or a computer. In other words, information can also be referred to as a special type of data, data that is valuable, structured, and logical. Whether it's processed by the human brain or by a computer, as long as it has been processed, it has a basic situation. It can be, for example, let's say, we have read an article. This article, we can consider it as data. After reading the article, we can summarize the main idea into a paragraph, or write a reflection on it. That's what we call information. It's actually the original data, the original content. What we directly see as raw content is actually data, and after processing it, the content produced after simplification or summary, or after strict formatting, or rigorous logical analysis is called information. This is our basic concept of information. Now that we know the concept of information, what's next? Let's distinguish between information and data. You must choose clearly. Don't mix them up. First of all, here we divide it into 4 points in total. Feature essential, dependencies, and finally, We can explain it to you through an example. To summarize briefly, the data is actually a form after being processed. This is a simple summary. As for information, it needs to undergo a digital transformation, turning into data, before it can be stored and transmitted. This is essentially the relationship between them. Well, first of all, actually, the most basic feature is that our data is the most original content without any special features. Everything you see is actually data. For example, is this PPT data? Yes, it is. But it doesn't look like this. What did it look like? It might be a series of articles and books. In the end, when we were taking this course, we summarized the contents of our books into a PPT like this. Let me explain this to everyone. So, our books can actually be seen as relatively raw data, while the PPT we see here is valuable, right? It's logical, and summarizes some effective information for everyone to look at, and that's what we call information. It must be valuable and logical. Essentially, data is just raw knowledge. And what we have here as information is what? It's processed data. This is the relationship between the two of them. Data actually has nothing to do with information, because it exists by itself. Data is something that exists by itself, but information is different. Information depends on data. That is, if we want to extract any information, we actually need the original data. Otherwise, you can't even begin to talk about it, right? If you don't have any basic content, how can you summarize that information? This is the relationship between the two. A simple example would be places like cinemas or amusement parks right? They often sell tickets, and they sell them every day, every week, and every month. Public places, right? Many of them sell tickets like this. And they sell them every day, right? There are also sales every week and every month. So in the end, after summarizing all this information, hey, for example, let's summarize, hey, my monthly, the ticket sales volume. So what is this monthly sales volume? It's actually information. The ticket information collected daily, like the number of tickets sold, and the types of tickets, is actually what we call raw data. After we summarize the raw data, we compile it into our final sales report, which is generated monthly. This is a clear distinction between data and information in a business context. Or to give another example, take our weather forecast. Every day we check it on our phones. The weather forecast you see on TV is actually information that has been summarized. But what does the original data look like? Well, we have many meteorological stations around the world that collect a ton of data every day. So the data we've collected is actually the most original data. After we summarize this data, where do we send it? We send it to our phones, our TVs, and our computers so we can see this information. This is the basic relationship between data and information. The relationship between the two is actually one of dependence. Especially information, it really relies heavily on data to exist, right? Data, in fact, is, even if this is considered something, it's still our original information, which represents their basic relationship. So now, what are we going to look at next? Let's take a look at the life cycle of information. Gain management? Well, it's about our information from its birth to the end. What are the ups and downs today? That is, what journey he has gone through. First of all, if we create it, we actually create our data, and then summarize why it is summarized as one of ours. A basic information. So what should we do after the summary? The next step is the data protection stage, which is the most basic stage. What is the purpose of this stage? The purpose is to ensure the integrity of our data. For example, through what means? Read. Disk arrays, high availability, and other off-site disaster recovery, backup methods, as well as protecting our access permissions. This is our protection stage. The second stage is the access stage. The access phase is actually about accessing this information. This includes sharing information between multiple business links and multiple business applications in our enterprise. To provide us with the maximum business value. However, all data and information are time sensitive. For example, after a period of time, there may be more data. After we obtain the data, the value of the data we previously collected decreases, or there might be too much data for us to store. What we need then is migration. This is our migration stage. At this stage, you can migrate the data using various methods to different storage servers for basic backups, ensuring the integrity of the data. Then, after a while, say a few months or a year, this data may become completely useless or outdated. When the data is outdated, we generally don't just destroy it directly. Instead, we archive it or store it away. This is our archiving stage. File to one of our in the storage servers. Finally, what happens after it is completely saved? Finally, what is the process of destruction? This is the complete life cycle of our data, starting from its birth, when data is born, to when it becomes information, and then to when it is shared. Migration, archiving, and destruction are the complete life cycle of the information. That is, the life of the information. It needs to go through these contents. This is the basic concept of our information. Whether it is information or data, these are actually what we store. The most important basic concept in this course is that once everyone understands it, it will greatly facilitate the understanding of subsequent courses. That's the content of this lesson. If anyone wants to learn about Huawei certification technologies or wants to access the Huawei certification question bank, please feel free to reach out. You can also leave comments below the video for technical exchanges. All right, that's it for today, everyone. Bye.